this for 6 years now. But what I found was that there was a place in Seattle that I lived during those 20 years for a couple of years, and there was a town in Peru that I lived. And so I began to remember Peru. So I didn't know anything about it at the time. And I began to remember the town with the airstrip. And I go, maybe it's on Google. And I sat down on my computer. This is the next day after it. So this is May of April. It was the end of April. I got my MRI. And it was the first week or two of May that I got the memories back in 2015. And I started looking at Google and I went, what? And I found the town and I go, and not only that, so if you think about finding somebody on Google Earth that you've never been, that you've never physically been, I can prove it easily because I've only ever left the country to go to Canada and Australia. I've never been to Peru, so there's no stamp. But if you see somewhere you've never been before on Google Earth, and then all of a sudden, I remember walking in the streets when it was raining. I remember fishing in the ponds that he took me with. I remember eating in the cafeteria. I could look at all these buildings, and I went, I know this whole area, and I know where they set up a temporary shower at the end of the airstrip. On and on and on. The gold mine down the street, we're down on the under the river. Like I knew the area intimately well, as you have to not live somewhere. And then I found the house in Seattle. And it was the same experience. I knew it was on an island, one of the islands near Seattle. And I found the house. I went, there's the swimming pool. I spent hours and hours and hours in the summertime. We were like a foster home with a bunch of boys. And I was swimming in the pool and I found the pool and everything else. So then I went and I immediately, like I said, I looked in the phone book once and I wanted counseling. And I knew that I would be medicated immediately, that no professional counselor is going to entertain time travel and cloning and such. So I didn't bother with that. And then I had to sit down with my wife, like we talked off camera. My wife who thought that if there was ETs, they'd be in the Bible. So she doesn't, I really still think that she's kind of skeptical, but she accepts what I do. I spend a lot of time doing interviews and the book. I travel a lot. I go to talks. So she's supportive in her way, but it's something that people that follow ufology tend to have had something happen to them that leads them to know that it's real. People that follow the fringe stuff have experienced things, and my wife just hasn't experienced anything. So she gives me my space. But I sat down with her that day, I think on the third day after I got my memories back, and we went out. I made a bonfire, and I said, leave your phone in the house, hon. And I set my phone down, and I laid everything on her and I said, please prove me wrong. Please, I want you to be the skeptic and ask me the hardest questions you can possibly ask. Please dash this to pieces. And so we can put it to bed. And because something's wrong here. And if I'm wrong, if you can ask me questions that I can't answer, and we can move on. I want to be able to move on, but otherwise I have to pursue this. I have to talk to people. And she couldn't. And by the end of the night, on the third night, we did 3 bonfires for 3 nights, where she came at me with questions. She thought about it all day. And on the end of the third night, I had her believing in extraterrestrials because she just couldn't. There was no loophole. I had the entire work in my head. So, and it's a very strange experience to have answers to things that I'd never thought about. So people ask me questions, and I go, "Oh, well, no," and I have the answer. Because of that knowledge that was suppressed, that I got access to. It's like a wall went down and I had access to that knowledge. So, and then the spiritual component, I'd like to learn more about you. And you know what I mean? Like everybody has their beliefs. And I know that you read parts of the book where I called on Jesus and had results. And I have my own kind of thing, my own beliefs and how that works. And I feel, like I said, everybody's relationship with God is between them and God. Right. I think that's a sovereign right about every living being ever. And so because I don't know much about it, because of what I lived through and how that went, because I don't know much about it, I don't really remark on that part of the story very often of what happened. But it was a very profound thing that I'm shocked that I don't get asked about more often, to be honest.
So, yes. And like I said before we got on camera, when I got to the end of the book, it was almost like a stand up and cheer moment for me personally. But we're not at the end of the book right now because my listening audience is, okay, Peru, off the coast of Washington, memories of being somewhere you never went. How'd you get there? And that is where we begin to connect the dots. And so in your book, Ceres Colony Cavalier, and for those of you that are listening on iTunes and all of our different outlets, podcasts, right? And you didn't see him hold the book up. It's Ceres, Ceres. That's the name, because it's not Sirius like the constellation. It's
it gets confused with the star quite often. Yeah, it's
right.
Ceres, but it's Ceres. It's a dwarf planet in between Mars and the asteroid belt. Sorry.
So you started getting all of these pieces, and man, like, how do you reconcile memories of Peru when there is no record of you being there? And, you know, in some cases, right, when I meet people, we learn they were, well, sold into government projects by their parents. They were trafficked over international lines. I've had plenty of those stories before. Your story is different. In your story, there was an abduction, and what led up to that is also fascinating. So let's rewind to 10 years old.
Sure.
What happens?
10 years old, I was living in Southern Michigan. I was in Willis, Michigan, and I was going to a school, an old school, like a B class school. I think we had 400 or 500 kids in my class, and I was in fourth grade at the time, and I was in the talented and gifted program. So we were the top 5% of the school, got funding for advanced learning class, and it was like every Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. The kids from that would go to the library, and we had our teacher, and we'd sit down, and it was like learning how to look things up in the library, advanced learning stuff. So pre-college, maybe, I don't know. There was a kid in there that wrote, and it was a rural school, so we're kind of out in the cornfields. And there was a kid there that was a new kid that year, and he would come to school sometimes in a limousine and get dropped off. And he was he was really smart. And I was proud of being smart. And in that, in my house, when I went home to my brothers and sisters, I was the smart one now because I was in that class. So it was like I had a great deal of pride. I was cocky. And here comes this kid who was clearly smarter than me. And so I didn't like him, and we didn't get along, and I kind of picked out. And one day he says, on one Wednesday, we're sitting there just as kids, and he goes, "My dad's an Illuminati. What's your dad do?" And he was condescending, is what it was an insult, but I didn't understand what I said. What is he, a banker or something? And so I said, "My dad works for GM. My dad's got a great job, and which he did." And whatever. We didn't get along, and then one day his dad came in and was the judge for the science fair, and I believe it was in April of that year, April of '82. So it was a school year from '81 to '82. Early accounts of my memories, I thought I was 9 years old in '81 because I did the grade, but really I realized that it was after the first of the year. So I was 10. I turned 10 in February, and so little details are important to researchers like that. So in April '82, his dad came in, and we were setting up. It was a Wednesday, the science fair, and we were setting our exhibits up in the cafeteria. So the talented and gifted class were the participants of the science fair. And so I came in, and I walked right by him and his dad, and he goes, "Dad, that's that boy I told you about that ruined my confidence." That's what he said. And then his dad said some other things, like they had a conversation about, like, out loud within earshot of me, about me rudely, and talked about me. And I didn't understand it, so I just went on about my way because I was fine, I just went on. And the next day was a Thursday, and that's when I woke up in the middle of the night. The phone, we had the old phone, it was ringing. We had lights. There was a big bright light outside shining down from the sky from above. And there was weird happenings went on for 20 minutes. And I woke up, and there was a gray, what we see in the movies, and everybody art like a gray ET. And I thought it was my dad playing a joke on me, because my dad was like a really heavy prankster. And I said, "Dad, take off the mask. You're not being funny." And I reached up and I touched its face, and it was cold and wet. It was like it had giant pores. It was very porous and cold. And I went, I went to scream, and it paralyzed me, whatever it did. There was and I was paralyzed. And then 3 or 4 other shorter reptilian looking people. And ETs are people. So it's an important, that's a great way to just, I always call it, they're just people. Once they get up to 150,000 words and more, then it could be a bucket of goo. It's still a person. And, so they came in and grabbed me, and I remember I kind of passed out, took me to the edge of my bed. There was a flash of light, and the next thing I remember, I was on a table, and they were explaining that they wanted my help. And I was taken into these programs, and they said they were going to take me for 20 years and bring me right back, that I was lucky, it was a blessing. And I was very fortunate to be chosen. That's kind of how they talked me in. And they had to get consent. They said, will you consent to do this with us? And I thought it was a first contact situation. I was thrilled. I thought tomorrow on the news, I'm going to see ETs, and I'm, you know what I mean? I'm in on it. I was excited. I was happy. And so, yeah, I said, sure, I want to help you guys. And boom, it was a surgical procedure. And then I woke up with no memories. So what's interesting is that I got those memories back then. Another contention, a point of evidence, is that I woke up in Inyokern, next to Ridgecrest, California, by China Lake in California, I said China Lake, I saw the look on your face. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know
so if you
exactly
look on the map,
what you're talking about.
If you look on the map, Inyokern is, I don't know, 11 miles, maybe, west of China Lake. But it was the airport there, and there were 3 portable buildings that were situated on the, where the hangars were. It's a smaller airport. And there was a bunch of kids, and I got a medical examination, and I had no memory. I could hardly even talk. It took me a while to get the speech memory, but I had no memory of mom and dad or what I was. And he said I was a clone. He said, because you're clones. For the project, he was told that he had a bunch of kids, a dozen kids that were clones, because they began to put us through trauma-based mind control program. And then that morphed into, once we passed certain tests, it morphed into a remote viewing program. And so what's interesting about, the reason I'm going into depth about this, because I really want to just throw it to you and get into the more questions. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because I also found evidence. So those same 3 buildings, I believe, were tore down, and then they put new buildings in their place. But I think in 2019, I had a researcher, like somebody that's very talented at researching. They said, I want to help you out. I want to work. Well, let's research and prove you right, Tony. And what he did was there's a database, there's a website that has every structure in the United States must have a tax assessment. So if you put up a shed, you must register with the taxes that it has a tax assessment, so you pay taxes. Every single structure in the United States is on this website for that reason. So it's the database. And he got access to it, and he went on there and found that those 3 buildings that he said, that's funny, I can't find because we tracked it back to Project Grow Flame, the funding from Project Grow Flame, the dates match up, and the personnel matches up. So there's a lot of things I don't talk about publicly, but other researchers know, because there are real people and real people involved. And some of the names I protect because they have family members, and it's like, it's just a minefield to go on a podcast and start yelling out other people's names. But the names matched up with Project Grow Flame. And in Inyokern there, those 3 buildings, he said, on this database, those buildings don't exist. They don't exist. And they're classified as a special district. And he said, I don't know what the heck that is. So he went and researched what a special district is in state of California. And it's somewhere that is on a congressional level of jurisdiction. So not only were kids being tortured in there, but it was perfectly legal. The local law enforcement, and in fact, the state troopers and the military police, do not have jurisdiction inside a special district. So inside those buildings, no law enforcement had jurisdiction. It was only a congressionally appointed officer of the law could go in there and actually dictate law. So that's, what I mean? Does it prove everything right in the book? No, but it is very supportive, because it shows that the program that I identified and the methods that I remembered and identified with researchers that have, can draw lines with other people that do it, was perfectly legal. And that's exactly how they would go about that. So that was something that's something that I always like to mention, because there's a lot of questions that come up. when you talk about what we went through as kids,